now I'm going to cover conjunctions. Conjunctions, a lot of folks know them as and, but, and or, but there's a lot more to them than that, a lot more. And we're going to come back to them in Chapter 4, and I'm going to go into them in much more detail, how you can use them. But for now, I just want to introduce them, and we'll go into, later on, really what they do. They are not they're not meaningful words in and of themselves. They aren't. They're really more of a structural word. They function much in the same way as prepositions do. In fact, what they do is they relate words, phrases, and clauses to other words, phrases, and clauses. That's what they do. Okay? So in and of themselves, they don't have much meaning. A word like, but is or, they're both, much like prepositions, are very difficult to define. They don't carry much meaning. What they are really is a structural element. And we're going to see this also. Trying to define a word like if is very difficult. It is more about the function they have than the content they have. And if you remember back to the early lecture, most of the meaning in an English sentence is taken care of by the nouns and the verbs. By the nouns and the verbs. Most of the detail and nuance are taken care of by adjectives and adverbs. But really, the structure of the sentences and the structure of the ideas and everything is controlled by the prepositions and the conjunctions. So these get much more into style and into structure of your writing than into meaning. And we're going to come back to these in Chapter 4, but I want to give you a quick little sense about how they work and how they can work. So there are two types of conjunctions. Two types of conjunctions. One you're probably already quite familiar with. The other one probably not so much, but it's going to be just as important, if not more important, for creating more sophisticated writing. First of all is coordinating conjunctions. Coordinating conjunctions, what they do is they relate one element A to another element B. And that A and B can be any word, phrase, or even clause. So what they do is they hook them up and say these two things are on an equal level. And they can be, those two elements, the A and the B, can be a word, a phrase, or a clause related to another word, phrase, or clause. That's what they do. And again, these words are the ones you know best. The and, but, or are the most common ones. The so and yet are also very common conjunctions, very common coordinating conjunctions. You may have heard the word for as a coordinating conjunction. It can be. I don't cover it because almost always in contemporary English the word for is used as a preposition and not as a conjunction. The only place you might hear it is in any kind of writing or speech that's trying to be somewhat, Elizabethan or Renaissance. You might hear it in, a Shakespearean play. He went to the market for he wanted to buy, some fruits or vegetables. Most modern speakers and writers of English would never use for as a conjunction because it sounds so archaic. So really, the primary coordinating conjunctions are and, but, and or. You will also see, however, the use of so to coordinate some clauses in yet. But yet really means the same thing as but, or very close to it. So and, but, and or can relate two words, two phrases, or two clauses to each other. And we're going to come back to this in Chapter 4. Okay? Those you're familiar with. The other type of conjunction is called the subordinating conjunction. And what it does is it puts one clause and attaches it to another clause. Now we haven't really covered clauses yet. We're going to come back to these, especially in Chapter 4, but I'll explain it a little bit now. So it attaches one clause onto a main clause, which is going to be that independent clause, okay? So it attaches it onto it, but it's saying, I'm not as important as this main clause. It can attach it to the front, or it can attach it to the back of the sentence. It can do it at either place. And really what it does is it sets up a type of clause called a dependent clause. It's going to set up a dependent clause. Now again, for many people, they might know what a dependent clause is and what subordinating conjunctions are. If you don't worry about it. I'm just introducing it right now. We're going to go into it in much more detail in Chapter 4. For most students, I find at this level, they've heard of coordinating conjunctions, and, but, and, or. Subordinating conjunctions are somewhat new. They've used them before, and you use them in your speech all the time. Words like when, after, since, and if. These aren't fancy words, but they set up what's called a dependent clause. In most cases, students have been using these all along, but they just weren't aware of the structures that they were creating. So what you're doing when you use when, after, since, if, and I should tell you there are many more. There's about 20 to 25 you'll want to be familiar with. You don't have to memorize them, but you do need to be quite familiar with them. These are setting up dependent clauses which are being attached onto independent clauses. That's what they do. So these are the glue that attach a dependent clause onto an independent clause. So for now, just know that when, after, since, if, those are actually a type of conjunction. We're going to come back to this in Chapter 4, and you'll get it in much more detail. This is usually new. For most students, this is usually old. Be aware that in both cases, what you are doing is connecting either words and phrases, or sometimes you're connecting clauses with the conjunction. Not much meaning in themselves, but really you're setting up a relationship. That's what prepositions and conjunctions do. Take care.